Welcome to the Bitcoin Source, your number one podcast for diverse Bitcoin knowledge. I'm Dadu, your host for today's thought-provoking session, and we're thrilled to have with us Akin Fernandez, the founder and CEO of Azteco. Akin has been a fixture, a beacon in this space for quite some time, and I just want my audience to know that this has been an honor to have a conversation with this gentleman. It has been a really eye-opening experience for me as a host, as a podcaster, even as just a Bitcoiner, to have this conversation with someone that has well over 15 years of experience in the Bitcoin ecosystem, whether it's being a software developer or just being an outright entrepreneur and CEO. And I hope people get value from this conversation because I surely did. Akin will share his insights on the future of Bitcoin, the importance of user-friendly Bitcoin technology such as Azteco, and really hope that people listen to this conversation, take it into account of how they approach Bitcoin, realizing in Akin's words that Bitcoin is not money, it's actually a paradigm shifting, world bending technology that's going to really usher in sovereign wealth, equality, and allow people to transact peer to peer without having a middleman or an intermediary. And eventually the world will capitulate to Bitcoin is what Akin's thought process is. And I'm just super honored and grateful to be the person to have this conversation with him. The conversation went well over an hour. We really got into some deep, thought-provoking philosophy behind Bitcoin. And I'm just honored for people, for my audience to watch this episode. So without further ado, let's go. So Akin, this is your first time here. I want to start from the beginning, and I would love to know about your origin and mission of Azteco. So could you start by telling us about the origins of Azteco and what specific need or gap in the market you aimed to address with your Bitcoin voucher service?
Well, my interest in synthetic money, which Bitcoin is, goes back many years, back to the time of Xiaomi and eCash. And Xiaomi and eCash was a centralized attempt to make an electronic money that works over the internet. And I immediately saw that this was a way to produce a money that could be widely used that replaced the dollar. And so I tried to start a business based on the Xiaomi and eCash. But for one reason or another, the eCash company went away because it was a company run by a group of people, essentially a centralized organization. And then they had to stop doing that because the people who ran the software essentially went away and the service didn't exist. So fast forward into 2010, I think it was December 2000 or December 2010, probably, I can't remember. And I read about something called Bitcoin. And in the intervening years between Xiaomi and eCash and Bitcoin, I've been playing around with things like Nutella, Skype, Napster, and those sorts of things to do with file sharing, and of course BitTorrent. And those services taught everyone that you don't have to have a single server, a centralized server, in order to provide a service to anybody. And of course Napster came before Nutella and BitTorrent. And so that went from a centralized method of sharing files to a decentralized method of sharing files. And so when I read about Bitcoin, I knew instantaneously that if this software worked as described, and there was no reason to believe that it shouldn't work, because if you can share files in a distributed manner, there's no reason why you can't distribute a synthetic money in the same way. All that needed to happen was that the software was written correctly, and then the idea would work. And so I downloaded this Bitcoin client, which is exactly the same as the Nutella client, exactly the same as the BitTorrent client, and started to mine Bitcoin. Back in those super early days, we could do it on a single CPU machine. The mining part appeared to work, and I could send Bitcoin between one machine and another, and it would go down on one machine and up on another machine. And so it appeared to be working as a synthetic form of money. And so, barring any kind of software bugs or flaws in the system, the holy grail of synthetic money was actually in the world now. And then it became a question about what we're going to do with it. How are we going to get it to as many people as possible? Because in the same way that BitTorrent works when many people are sharing the same file, the same movie file, or whatever it is, it can be spread all over the world very, very quickly. A lot of people need to be running Bitcoin so that they can all use it as a money peer-to-peer, literally peer-to-peer, without a central point of failure or control or anything. And so, fast forward again, it's very, very hard to mine Bitcoin, and I wanted more Bitcoin. And so it turned out that Amir Taki had started a business called Intersango, which he set up to sell people Bitcoin. You have to give him your Bitcoin address, send money to his Bitcoin to his bank account, the Intersango bank account, and then after the payment cleared and it showed up on his statement, he would send you the appropriate amount of Bitcoin to your address that you'd given him. And this took about 3 days to process. And I realized that 3 days is absolutely ridiculous, far too long to do something which is essentially writing an entry in a database. People all over the world top up their mobile phones with a voucher, and it happens instantaneously. They get these vouchers from supermarkets and convenience stores. And so I put 2 and 2 together and realized that there's no reason why this cannot be done for Bitcoin also. And it's on that day that I decided that I have to write the service and the software to power it that could deliver Bitcoin to a consumer in literally seconds, just the way that they top up their mobile phones. And I knew, being from, having experience in places where people don't have phone accounts, that millions of people top up their mobile phones with vouchers. And so those people also happen to overlap in the demographic of the unbanked, one-to-one. And so to me, it was immediately obvious that this is an incredibly important thing that I could be building and providing to other people. Not only to people like me who needed Bitcoin, who needed to get hold of Bitcoin in a trivially easy manner, but people who had no bank accounts, no history of interacting with bank accounts or anything like that, and who could all of a sudden, on the same mobile phones that they used to send whatever it is they're sending to each other, receive and send money.
Hey there, fellow Bitcoin enthusiasts. We just wanted to take a moment to appreciate you for tuning in to the Bitcoin Source, a Bitcoin conversation. Your support means the world to us as we dive into the exciting world of Bitcoin, blockchain, and all things cryptocurrency. If you've been enjoying our content, don't forget to hit that like button. It's like a virtual high five that keeps us motivated. And hey, sharing is caring. If you know someone who'd geek out over Bitcoin as much as we do, hit that share button. Finally, if you want to stay up to date with all our latest episodes and insights, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single update. Thanks for being a part of our community. Keep exploring, and remember, the future is decentralized. Now back to the episode.
This is an unbelievable, unprecedented opportunity, not only to help people, but to change the way people interact with money and how they think about money as well. And so that's the origin of Azteco, the short form.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think a lot of people cast aspersions on what Bitcoin is or how it should be used or who should use it. And I just love hearing the testimonial that you have of really looking for a solution to a problem and finding a almost unique and very different way of approaching it. Because, not to pontificate, but there's a lot of founders and CEOs in the space that are in the Bitcoin ecosystem, but they don't have any technical background or they don't have real world experience with actually using the protocol. They're just really good at being a CEO or founder, or they've built a few companies before and they just kind of figured that this is something that they could arbitrage and wing it and just figure it out. And I want to peel back the layers of what makes you unique, Akin, which is your software development background. And just from you explaining some of the processes of how you went about Azteco, it just makes sense that I think you're a very technical guy. You understand how this works. And with your 15 years of experience as a software developer, how has this background influenced the development and operational strategies of Azteco?
When I discovered Bitcoin, I was working on a group SMS messaging service called YouPingMe. And to test that I understood how the API that Bitcoin Core presents to the user, I decided to incorporate Bitcoin payments into UPingMe just to see if I could do it. And the Bitcoin Core API was not that difficult, and actually it's not difficult to interact with, to make payments and receive payments automatically. And so after I completed this experiment, I knew that I'd be able to develop the platform to actually deliver Bitcoin to people using vouchers. And so one of the things I can say about these so-called CEOs, being one myself, not everybody can be a software developer. Not everybody can have the same experience. And so when people come to Bitcoin, they bring the experience that they have and they apply that to what they believe Bitcoin to be. So they can be given a pass for misconstruing what Bitcoin is. They only have what they know to go on. They've all been inured to the idea that the government produces the money. Money is pieces of paper or entries in a ledger in the bank, and that's it. So when they are presented with Bitcoin, they don't have any context within which to place it because it's very new. It's very novel. First of all, it's novel in that the supply of the money is limited, that there is nobody in control of it. Most people have no means of conceiving of things that don't have a person in control because they've lived their entire lives with absolutely everything that they do and interact with having some person in charge, some person who is responsible. But there is no person in charge of, for example, BitTorrent. BitTorrent exists in and of itself, run by the network of peers who are sharing the files. There is no boss. And this is alien to people that think that watching movies is about Netflix. These people are not software pirates. They don't know anything about this kind of stuff. And so for people who have experience in file sharing and all kinds of other things, it's a quite natural step from BitTorrent to Bitcoin. And so these CEOs, many of which are not software developers, can be forgiven for not understanding this stuff. But I come from a slightly different background where I am a software developer. I'm very interested in how software works. And so these leaps of intuition were quite easy for me to make. And the reason why I had to become a software developer, I started developing software in 1978, 1979 in assembler. And I stopped working in assembler because it was extremely difficult to do, and it was kind of hard to get anything out of it that you could actually do something with, unless you also understood hardware. And so it was many years later that I started picking up software again when I was trying to build this UPingMe project. And it's very difficult to get other people to understand what it is you're trying to design and accomplish. So it's much easier to learn Python or PHP or something like that and build it yourself. I mean, it's not that hard if you have the wherewithal to do it. And so to build this UPingMe, I taught myself how to develop modern software with modern tools. And it actually was surprisingly easy. It's much easier than developing in assembler, for heaven's sake. So by the time I had finished writing UPingMe, I realized that I could write Azteco quite trivially easily in the first couple of versions. And of course, Bitcoin has some unique characteristics, which means that you cannot use the normal lab stack with it because Bitcoin actually behaves just like money. And so you can't have the server that runs it or the keys that are being distributed and sent back and forth on a server that's open in the public internet. So you have to have very interesting architectural choices that you have to make in order to protect yourself and everything that you're doing. And of course, once again, file sharing helps with that kind of mindset you have to have, and also not using Microsoft Windows as your operating system. If you use Unix as your operating system, in our case Linux, this helps you tremendously in putting together the right decisions in order to make things work. And so that, once again, is more or less how it happened. But I think we need to be very, very careful about being too harsh to judge these people who don't understand Bitcoin. Bitcoin is very difficult to understand across the board. And I'll have to say that I don't have a full understanding of how it works under the hood, because that's the real rocket science down there. But for the C-class people who don't understand it, we have to be patient with them. And I have patience with anybody who's willing to learn and to accept they don't know everything. It's very important to be careful about the pronouncements you make about how Bitcoin should work, how people should interact with it, when you don't know anything about how it works or why it was even written. Many of the people in Bitcoin today don't understand why Bitcoin was written. They accept the proposition that the government should be the sole proprietor of money as a tool in society, insofar as there is such a thing as society. And this is completely wrong. So you can believe whatever you want. You must make sure you leave the Bitcoiners in peace to do what they want.
Yes, well said, well said. I love that analogy, and I commend you for giving that clarification, Akin, because, I'm kind of a nerd, so, I went to school for finance, but I dabbled in front-end development, some web development stuff using JavaScript, Python. So I understand some of the back-end protocol more than probably the layman or laywoman, but what I love is that you make sure that people all have a fair shot learning about Bitcoin. And I think that that's what Azteco does a great job of doing. And one thing that I found, especially when it got really technical or it was hard for me to understand things and how to relay that information to somebody else, I started writing. And I know that you have this extensive writing catalog that you've talked about Bitcoin, you've talked about technology for so many years. What are some of the key messages or themes you aim to convey through your articles and blogs about Bitcoin?
Well, number one is that Bitcoin is not money. Bitcoin is not money, it's a database. And so if you want to call Bitcoin money, if you are so deluded as to want to call Bitcoin money, then you have to have the same approach to everything. Super Mario, 6 gold coins, Rainbow Six Siege, they all have their own in-game monies. Why don't you call those money? Why don't you call Gary Gensler to go and regulate Nintendo? They don't. The people don't understand when they call Bitcoin money that it has very grave implications for everything that they're doing as Bitcoiners and fans of Bitcoin. And when you confront them with this, the fact that it's just a database, their eyes glaze over. They don't know what you're talking about, because many of these people don't work with software. And it's okay that they don't work with software. It's okay that they don't understand how it works. What they must not do is go to the legislatures and try and impose their ignorant positions on other people that have nothing to do with them. Now, the fact of the matter is that Bitcoin is a database. And this is not something that's controversial. This is not a point of view. This is not semantics as to what these people try and assert. It's a statement of plain fact. And so I suspect that we're going to have to go, some Bitcoin or some brave Bitcoin, it might be Jack Dorsey or something like that, we'll have to go to the Supreme Court and have it asserted in law that Bitcoin is protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution in the United States. It's the only way we're going to get these people off our backs forever. And a lot of them are not ill-willed people. They're well-meaning people. They actually think they're trying to help by codifying Bitcoin in law, calling it a digital asset, of which there is no such thing, calling it money, which Bitcoin is not, and all of that other kind of nonsense, which are all analogies which have been developed to try and explain Bitcoin to people who don't have any awareness of what it is. And so they use these analogies as a way of conveying the information on a level that people can understand. If you say that a Bitcoin is a database using Berkeley DB in the back end, and we use public key cryptography to create the private keys and public keys and blah, 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 nobody's going to understand that. But if you say it's a digital asset, well, this is understandable. That's just 2 words. Or if you say Bitcoin is money, that's 1 word. But both of those things are wrong. And because there's a very, very large body of regulation that touches financial activities, it's quite natural to superimpose those those rules on Bitcoin if in fact Bitcoin is money. But if Bitcoin is not money, which it is not, then the First Amendment applies, and every American citizen has the right to publish books, and there's no specification in the First Amendment that books of numbers are different from books of poetry or prose. And so there is no basis in law in the United States for regulating Bitcoin. And that's a fact. We're going to have to go to court to assert it because these well-meaning people are well-funded and stubborn, and we're going to have the gavel put down on them. Or Bitcoin will spread much more slowly because it's difficult to start businesses to spread Bitcoin to the consumer, and there's all kinds of onerous rules that you're going to have to follow in order to publish numbers, and that's anti-Bitcoin. So we find that people are less willing to start Bitcoin businesses in New York because of the BIT license, precisely because the people there have misconstrued it and taken it upon themselves to violate their oaths to support the Constitution. And that's exactly what they are, by the way. They're oath breakers, anti-Americans, and they're very, very dangerous. So we're going to have to go to court to get these laws taken down, and it's going to take a long time, maybe tens of millions of dollars in legal fees to do it. Or you're going to have to go to a place like Wyoming, which is a place that's sane. But then again, that means the people in New York won't be able to use your services. And even now in America, where there's 50 states, each one of them has a bespoke law about how Bitcoin is treated. Now, that's actually a good thing because it's a federated country where people have different states have different laws. You can go to the states where the laws are more sane or more to your liking. But there is a law of the whole nation, which is the Constitution, and the First Amendment applies to everywhere. And of course, this is the same problem that's happening with the Second Amendment, where different states have different laws about how guns are treated and ammunition, and more and more. And so there's states that are open carry states, and states where you're not barely allowed to own a pistol or a rifle or anything else. So this kind of dynamic is going to come to Bitcoin, and it's going to affect a lot of people unless someone goes to the Supreme Court and gets them to force the states to obey the law that these apparatchiks have sworn to follow. And this is a very, very serious business, because anybody who is for America, which coincidentally, I actually am for America, believe it or not. But anybody who's for America cannot be against Bitcoin, first of all, and cannot be for calling Bitcoin money, and cannot be for the regulation of Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't require regulation any more than writing novels requires regulation. It's exactly the same thing. Or math requires regulation. And in fact, there's a case called Bernstein where a mathematician was forbidden from performing math or discussing math because the type of math he was doing was classified as munitions. They went to the court and had it struck down because math is not munitions, it's just math. It's just writing in symbols on a piece of paper. And so the similar kind of thing has to happen. A similar kind of argument has to be put in front of a court so that everybody knows that Bitcoin is hands off. You cannot touch Bitcoin. You cannot regulate Bitcoin. You cannot regulate the people who are using Bitcoin. And of course, the EU is not the same as the United States. They're bringing in all kinds of terrible laws defining things like custodial wallets and non-custodial wallets and all kinds of other gibberish that means absolutely nothing. And that's fine. What happens in Europe stays in Europe. And so they can live by whatever rules they want. Americans, on the other hand, is another matter entirely. We have rights that are written down in law. They're written down. There's not something of a tradition or anything like that. It's codified. You can go and refer to it, and they, if you fight hard enough, they will be applied wherever they need to be applied. And so that's the situation of calling Bitcoin money. It's a big problem, and if we don't get on top of this problem, offering Bitcoin services is going to suffer.
Yeah, I love the way that you kind of eloquently broke that down, and that just gave me a couple thoughts about a number of things. The first is that, someone I consider a mentor in this space, and I think you know this gentleman as well, Chris Hunter, who co-founded Galoy and some other applications. He always talks about the hostile environment that we're currently in. If you're a CEO, a founder, creating a Bitcoin startup, a Bitcoin business. And I was so grateful to hear you, Akin, talk about kind of these bureaucracies and government kind of like tariffs, if you would say, that are being put in place to kind of mitigate Bitcoin's adoption. And it makes me think about the UK, Europe, some of these different places where you need a different set of abilities to obtain Bitcoin, whether it's a money transmitter license or being an accredited investor. And you're just seeing all these different wonky things going on in the space versus in the US, the approach to Bitcoin is completely different. And I wanted to hear your thoughts on, do you think that that narrative is slowly changing now that the ETF has been approved in the US? I think Hong Kong recently just opened up a spot ETF for Bitcoin. So do you think that those kind of institutions, whether it's the SEC, the IRS, are intertwining themselves into Bitcoin? Do you believe that that will change the terminology of it being just a digital asset or money? And do you think that that will actually usher in people going in and trying to actually change laws and advocate for Bitcoin on a better front?
We're thrilled to bring you the exclusive Bitcoin Source podcast merchandise collection. Designed with our dedicated community in mind, our collection features high-quality apparel and accessories that embody the spirit of innovation and community that our podcast represents. Imagine a world where your passion for Bitcoin shines, not just online, but in every step you take. Introducing the Bitcoin Source Podcast's exclusive merchandise line, where fashion meets your favorite cryptocurrency. From sleek tees to cozy coffee mugs, our collection is designed for the true Bitcoin believer. Diverse, vibrant, and absolutely eye-catching. Witness our community come alive as enthusiasts just like you flaunt their style, making a bold statement without saying a word. Why choose the Bitcoin Source merchandise? It's simple. Our unique designs are inspired directly by our podcast, created with top-quality materials for durability and comfort. Plus, every purchase supports our mission to deliver the content you love, fueling the Bitcoin movement and our community. Every piece you wear is a conversation starter, a story to tell, a step closer to the future of finance. Visit our store today and find your perfect piece of the Bitcoin Source. We're your support for the podcast and the broader Bitcoin movement with pride. Thank you for your continued support and happy shopping.
Well, no, actually, the ETFs, as interesting as they are, is not going to help the consumer adoption of Bitcoin. And for Bitcoin to do what it was designed to do, is be synthetic money, it needs to be adopted by the ordinary person. And ordinary people don't have access to these ETFs, as interesting as it is. And so, because Bitcoin is just a database, anybody can download it and work with it as long as they obey the rules of the database, which means you can't just write whatever you want to it without having to pay. That's essentially the breakdown of the rules. And so if a Goldman Sachs or whoever it is wants to start an ETF for a BlackRock, they're at liberty to do so and sell their services of writing to the database in bespoke ways, or not bespoke ways, but ways that their clients can access or not, is totally up to them. What's far more interesting and which have a much bigger global impact is the thing that we call consumer Bitcoin. Consumer Bitcoin is Bitcoin that can be used to purchase by anybody at any time. And that's normally for smaller amounts of Bitcoin, up to about $138 on average. It's the average size of an Azteco voucher. And so you can buy Bitcoin in the consumer sense from a site like G2A.com. We do a lot of business there. And normally people are buying small amounts of Bitcoin for whatever it is they want to do. And of course, the idea that there's one thing that you can do with Bitcoin, like it's an investment or it's an asset, is absolutely nonsense, because numbers don't have any intrinsic utility. They are universally applicable to anything that you want to count. And so in Bitcoin, numbers are being used to count entries on the ledger, and that means that it's basically just numbers. And so when we talk about consumer Bitcoin, we're talking about writing these entries on the ledger in a way that anybody can use for a very small amount. So if you want to buy a pencil, or you want to buy a milkshake, by the way, in El Salvador, if you want to buy a hamburger, you can go into McDonald's and pay with Bitcoin. If you want to fill up your car with gas, you can pay with Bitcoin. And nobody bats an eyelid, by the way, when you do that. It's perfectly normal in El Salvador. And so if you go to El Salvador, which I highly recommend that you do, because it's a wonderful country, not just as a place where you can see the example of consumer Bitcoin in action, but it's also just a nice place. And so it's some place I recommend everybody listening to this to go and visit. But what El Salvador shows is that if Bitcoin is allowed to flourish in a society, flourish in an economy, people will start to use it on an everyday basis to save, send, and spend, which is what Azteco is all about, providing access to Bitcoin so people can save, send, and spend. And the ETFs and all of that stuff, how the IRS accounts for it, how the SEC accounts for ETFs and all other business, it's all very interesting, but that's a very narrow focus on one country. America is only one country out of over 190. And so whilst Americans obviously would have an interest in what's happening inside of America, there are, believe it or not, other countries where people are doing things with money, including Bitcoin in the use case of synthetic money. And El Salvador is the most advanced nation when it comes to Bitcoin adoption. And I think when you see it there, and for me it was quite a surprise, even being somebody who's interested in Bitcoin, very, I would say disconcerting, but it's a very surprising that everywhere it takes Bitcoin, you can just flash the point of sale device and pay with Bitcoin. And nobody thinks it's any big deal. It's just more Bitcoin. In fact, it's only the foreigners there who make a big fuss out of it. Because down there, it's perfectly normal. It's just another way of paying for things. So I think it's very important to, as we talk about Bitcoin, to not get too focused on the ETFs, SDCs, IRS, and all these negative implications of Bitcoin. How is it going to be taxed? Who cares? Nobody cares about how WhatsApp works and how the messages get sent back and forth and what's the legal position of WhatsApp. Nobody asks that. They just use it. And that's what has to happen with Bitcoin. It's up to us to talk about Bitcoin in this way. Bitcoin is normal. Bitcoin is very ordinary. In fact, Bitcoin is boring. It's much better for everybody who's interested in Bitcoin if Bitcoin becomes boring and we don't talk about it from the legal aspects, the highfalutin financial instruments context, all that other stuff, which of course is interesting, but that's for the CNBCs and all of those guys, those Wall Street people talk about, not the ordinary person, especially if your aim is to get ordinary people interested in Bitcoin. Because nobody wants to hear, no normal person wants to hear about ETFs. I'm sorry. It's interesting, but it's not that interesting. It's much more interesting to say, it's just like Cash App, but if you're in Ouagadougou and your cousin is in Maryland, you can send money to each other in a second without having to go anywhere. That's far more interesting to the people in Ouaga and the people in Maryland who have their cousin in Ouaga who wants to have the money sent to them.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. And I agree. I definitely agree. A lot of people, they're looking to see what the ETF's going to do. And I think that a lot of Bitcoiners, they've been on the back burner. They don't really want the approval, but at the same time, they need it because it kind of gives this green litmus test to Bitcoin to say, okay, Gensler finally capitulated and he's allowing Bitcoin to be, ubiquitous in the space where people can buy into it. But I definitely agree with you, Akin, on that, where a lot of people are caught up in the politics of Bitcoin and not the actual solutions of Bitcoin. And that leads to another question I have, where Azteco is doing something very unique and something from my perspective as a Bitcoiner, an enthusiast, a writer, a podcaster, I was super excited to see. And that is Azteco blogs frequently highlighting individual stories from across the world about people utilizing Bitcoin, whether it's Katatsu from South Africa or Tania from Costa Rica, who used the Bitcoin voucher system through Azteco. Why did you think it was important to showcase these personal experiences? And what impact do these stories have on the broader perspective of Bitcoin's accessibility and utility?
Well, it's important to show people that there are individuals out in the world who are just like them, who are using Bitcoin in a way that they might not understand it can be used for. And they might not even know that it's possible to use Bitcoin at all. If everybody keeps talking about the ETFs and Gary Gensler, who they don't even know anything about, or they don't even know what ETF is. So if people start talking about stuff that's familiar, they're going to say, take another look at Bitcoin and see, hey, wait a minute, I do have a cousin in Jos, that maybe I can use that to send Bitcoin. Then I don't have to go down to the store, bring my passport, sign out the whole forms and everything, and it's much easier to use. And so when you see Kogatsu and you see all the people who we have in these stories, and we have a lot more of them to come, by the way, you will see how people are using Bitcoin, people just like you and me and people that you know. And then all of a sudden, it flips from being something for only the rich and also rich people in America to people in Brazil, people in Cameroon, and all these other kinds of places. And it makes it personal. It brings it closer to you. That's why we set out to do these stories in a way that conveys what the power of Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is a very, very powerful tool. And when it's in the hands of people in a form that they can easily manipulate, whether that's Wallet or Satoshi or Samurai Wallet, where the design of these apps and how they work makes it trivially easy to use Bitcoin on your own. Once you're exposed to that, then all of the possibilities will unfold in your mind as you imagine using it. Most of these people are either on Signal or on Facebook Messenger or on WhatsApp. And when they make the analogy between these tools that are messaging tools and Bitcoin in a good wallet, then the eureka moment will happen for them, and they'll realize that they can now receive any amount of money for any reason at any time with almost zero fees instantaneously, just like receiving a message on Facebook Messenger or Signal or WhatsApp. And so that's why we've created these stories, so that it can humanize it, personalize it, and people can connect with it and empathize with Bitcoin. It's not something for technical people. Our go-to-market man likes to call them tech bros. And he's right. This is not just something for technical people. This is not something that's just for Bitcoiners. This is for everybody. WhatsApp is for everybody. Facebook Messenger is for everybody. There is no Facebook Messenger person like there are Bitcoiners. There are no WhatsAppers. WhatsAppers are just people, and Bitcoiners are just people. And so we put just people in front of people to make them understand that anybody can use it. It's useful for everybody. You don't have to be a special person. You don't have to be an expert of any kind. You don't have to have read a book about it in order to use it. You just download Wallet of Satoshi or Samurai Wallet, and then you can use it. It's as simple as that. And there's no sign up. There's no giving away your passport or anything else like that, like any Coinbase account. You don't have to live in a particular country. You don't have to live in the right country in order to use Wallet Satoshi or Samurai Wallet. You just get it onto your phone, and then all of a sudden, the entire world of everybody else who has a Bitcoin app or a Lightning app on their phone is available to you. All you have to do is go into a call like this one that we're on, flash them the QR code, and then I can send you $100 like that. And if you don't happen to have a wallet with Bitcoin in it. You can go to, let's say that you're in Sao Paulo, you can go to any place where they sell lottery tickets, buy $50 worth of Bitcoin on an Azteco voucher, and show the QR code right here on the screen, and I can receive it in my wallet Satoshi. This is just unbelievable. It's absolutely unprecedented, and it's going to change everything. If we can get people to think about it correctly, to not think that Bitcoin is some kind of special or exotic thing. It's a very normal thing. It's a very boring thing. And unless people are willing to give up the cult aspects of Bitcoin, somebody else is going to come in and demystify it for everybody. Bitcoin mysticism and the mystification of Bitcoin is extremely toxic, extremely bad for Bitcoin adoption. And that's why I'm super excited about this thing here, which is the controller thumbpad unit for BitKey. This application with this device is going to change everybody's thinking about Bitcoin. Going to make it clear to everybody that Bitcoin is not complicated to use. It's very, very safe, and there is no reason not to use Bitcoin. So that's the kind of thinking that needs to be applied. And if it doesn't happen, the mass adoption of Bitcoin cannot then subsequently follow. And then Bitcoin acting as money in the economy is far less likely to happen, or at the very least, it's going to happen at a small, actually the maximum, it's going to happen at a smaller scale than any real Bitcoiner would desire. All real Bitcoiners want Bitcoin to completely replace fiat money. It's not something to use in conjunction with fiat. Bitcoin was written to replace fiat. And this is a very important, task that Bitcoin has, because fiat money is at the center of the root of all of the problems of society faced by society. It all be traced back to fiat money, which started in 1913 or whatever it was of Jekyll Island. So, Bitcoin is a very important project. We want Bitcoin to be founded in the best countries, whether that's El Salvador or the United States. It depends entirely on the legislatures, whether they're going to be Luddites or they're going to be people who accept that change happens. And then it's going to do its work by itself. And what's so amazing is that the entrepreneurs and business people who are creating the tools and services that work on Bitcoin are doing all the work of spreading Bitcoin to the people. Nobody's asking for government assistance to do any of this stuff. They're paying for it themselves. And so this is, in that aspect, of a superbly ethical effort to replace fiat money with nobody having to beg for fiat money to go away. They're just going to make it go away by providing a better service without firing a shot or doing anything, all on handheld mobile phones. Saying these words sounds like science fiction, but it's actually happening. It's astonishing, isn't it?
Yes. And that's why I love talking to you, Akin, because I believe like a few things come to mind when I have conversations, especially Bitcoin conversations. And in your case, like terms like synthetic money, anonymity, these are all things that I think are based around your philosophy as a Bitcoiner. And I wanted to delve into that front, which is your personal Bitcoin philosophy. How has your personal philosophy, in a sense, if you could say it's a philosophy, towards Bitcoin evolved over the years? And how does it influence your business practices and customer interactions today?
Well, that's a very, very good question. I wonder if there's such thing as a Bitcoin philosophy, because Bitcoin is just math, and math is not a philosophical matter. It's what you do with Bitcoin that is influenced by your philosophy. There are two aspects to how I think about it that govern the way I think about Bitcoin. The first was I'm a Christian, or a born-again Christian. And so we are bound over to obey the law and to obey the people who are set over us, in charge of us. This is directly from our Lord and Savior. And so those are the things that constrain me first of all. Now, that having been said, we are allowed to offer services to other people when these services are ethical services. So we don't steal from people. We're not commanded not to steal and all that kind of stuff. And so, and this brings us to another aspect of the fiat problem. Fiat is stealing. Fiat steals money, steals the work of the people who use it. And so it's unethical out of the box. Bitcoin doesn't do that. Bitcoin does not steal from the people who use it. In fact, when you earn Bitcoin, the value of it goes up because Bitcoin is scarce. And so when we reach the hyper-Bitcoinization part of the story, the value of the Bitcoin that you earn will not go up, but it won't go down. It won't go down because somebody's cheating and printing money in the background behind your back. Now, an ounce of gold historically has had the same value as a cow, a fully grown cow. This has been true for thousands of years. So if you kept your money in gold coins, or the dollar was on a gold standard, over time you could put $100 into the bank, and when that $100 comes out, it would have the same spending power. But because the fiat system is a criminal system run by criminals who are stealing money, stealing spending power from the population, you can put $100 in the bank today, and then 365 days in the future, by design, the fiat system takes 2% by their own calculations of that spending power away from you. So you have only $98 worth of spending power in the bank, whereas when you put the money into the $100 in the bank, you had $100 worth of spending power. That's why over decades, the value of the dollar has been going down. So you just compound that over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, $100 put away in 1950 would be worth much less than it was back in 1950 today in terms of its spending power. This is why you're getting people going on TikTok complaining that McDonald's is too expensive for them to afford, that they go to the supermarket and $100 basically buys them almost nothing. So this is about ethics. This is about stealing from people. It's not just about the things that Bitcoiners concern themselves with. This is a very serious problem. This is why I'm so unalterably opposed to altcoins, because altcoins divert attention from Bitcoin. They make the whole market confusing for people who don't understand why Bitcoin was created. And of course, because we can't expect people to understand the nuances of economics and why Bitcoin was created, these distractions make it more difficult for us to explain why Bitcoin is important. Because as soon as you start talking about it, they'll say, what about the other coins, quote unquote, other coins? Where, of course, there are no other coins. All of these systems are all inspired by or direct derivatives of the Bitcoin software, and they would not exist had Bitcoin not been written. And so we have one protocol, one set of protocols that govern how things are done over the internet, whether it's HTTPS, POP3, IMAP, Gopher, FTP, you name it, SSH is another one. And those protocols all work to make the internet work. Everybody uses the same protocols on the web. Everybody uses the same protocols to make phone calls and all the other stuff, like RTSP, which is the new one that's used for services like Whereby, which is encrypted end-to-end. So it's very important that everybody understands that we need to have a set of agreed-on protocols upon which everybody builds business. And Bitcoin is a protocol in that context. It's just another protocol. So you can't have two different kinds of ways of securing web pages. You can't have SSL and some other protocol to protect web pages. That means you've got to have two browsers. All the browser developers are going to have to integrate two different protocols to protect pages. And of course, all the web servers would have to be able to detect whether the browser is using protocol A or protocol B. etc., etc. And everything becomes much more complicated. Everything isn't unified. You can't have the economies of scale that are required to have a global platform like SSL and browsers. And so it's very important that people understand that altcoins are not a joke. Altcoins are not a bit of fun. Altcoins are a serious threat to the removal of the fiat system and to human beings being freed of the yoke of fiat. And so I get very excited when people talk to me about this because it's first of all, it's very exciting. And it's very, very interesting. And of course, I've forgotten what the original part of the question was, but I think I've said enough.
Yeah, I think you encapsulated the answer to the question, which was essentially your approach, your philosophy to Bitcoin. And I think that you elaborated that just from your passion for, the signal of the truth, which is Bitcoin. And altcoins can kind of, bog up or clog up the message that we're trying to convey to the world, which is Bitcoin is this decentralized kind of, paradigm shifting technology that is going to not only just free the person that's looking to have sovereign wealth, but this is going to actually have multiple layers to it where it's actually going to change the way communities are approached, peer-to-peer transactions are approached. Even the process of, if you can go as deep as looking at El Salvador, right? Like me and you met in El Salvador, we had great conversations. And when I went down there, just looking at the news or the media outlets, you're thinking that there's gangs everywhere. You're thinking that, this is an impoverished country. And in some places it probably is. But I will say, since Bitcoin has been legal tender in El Salvador and me going there in my own personal experience, I felt extremely safe. I felt like the prices of items and goods were fairly priced and you got the best bang for your buck. And I had to commend Bitcoin for that, because once you make the money be a fixture in society where it's fair, it's for everybody, there's no like bureaucracy or levels of classism, Bitcoin becomes this equalizer. And then you see the crime go down. You see people actually wanting to transact and do barter and conduct business. And the rest of the world is kind of lagging behind on this front because fiat money has corrupted the system on so many layers over the centuries that humans don't like change, right? Humans want to stay stagnant and doing the same things they've been doing their whole lives. And I think that Bitcoin is kind of, that's the front for technology and finance. It's like the two meshings of these worlds of finance and technology have just come in 2009, and we're still kind of battling to get the world to realize that we have the answers, or better yet, Bitcoin has the answers for a lot of the solutions that people for so many years have been trying to do. Humanitarian efforts, food drives, trying to get people to be financially empowered, all these different things that people have been fighting for. Bitcoin has found a way to kind of circumvent that so quickly and effectively. And now it's our job to educate people and to get people to realize that Bitcoin is the solution.
Well, Bitcoin doesn't have the solution. Bitcoin actually is the solution. And so
is the solution.
Exactly right. And also Bitcoin is the solution, but if you had the solution to the NP problem, which is a very dangerous thing, if you had a mathematical solution, doesn't matter what it is, if you had it inside an envelope and it wasn't opened and nobody read it, then you couldn't use that solution for anything. That's the cure for cancer. If you had the cure for cancer in an envelope and it was sealed and nobody, so you had kept it in a drawer, kept it under your pillow, and nobody was out to use it, the information by itself is useless. So Bitcoin has to be put into the hands of as many people as possible so that Bitcoin in motion can make these things happen. All the things you just described cannot happen if Bitcoin is not trivially easy to get and easy to use in a form factor, like an application where anyone can use Bitcoin without having to think. And the idea that Bitcoin can only spread if people are educated about it and what it's for is wrong. WhatsApp ate into the sales of SMS credits all over the world without anybody understanding how it works. Nobody had to understand how SMS or WhatsApp worked for people to switch from SMS to WhatsApp. All they had to be given was a phone and the WhatsApp program. And then once they had that, they have the ability to show it to all their family members, get them all on the same platform, and then all of a sudden, sending messages from A to B costs nothing. And so this is not something that needs to be explained in a book or anything. It's just the way it is. And so just imagine you get everybody onto Bitcoin. All of a sudden, everybody in the family is sending money back and forth to each other without having to go to the bank or anything like that. It doesn't matter where they are on Earth. That doesn't need to be explained. They just understand it because people are not stupid. And so that's the thinking that has to go into spreading Bitcoin. It has to be shown to people. They have to have an application like Wallet of Satoshi or Samurai Wallet, which is very easy to use that they don't need to be trained on at all. And then once they have that, and they have a means to get in Bitcoin, which is Azteco, then all of a sudden, the magic can start to happen. The networks of people using Bitcoin between each other can start to grow. And this is the other thing about that's my famous dog, Pippi. It's always barking when he shouldn't be barking. It's almost a meme in Azteco because whenever I'm doing something, Pippi starts to bark. Very annoying. And so in any case, it's when people start to get a hold of Bitcoin, those things will happen by itself. And what BitKey is doing, which is super interesting, there's a part in the BitKey application where you can assign a trusted person in your network to be the one of the people who helps in recovery of your data. And so by doing that, you make another person a user of BitKey. This is very clever stuff. And so by you using BitKey and assigning somebody, nominating somebody as a recovery helper, you're making another BitKey user. And so as families start to use it, first of all, one person in the family will get it, and then everybody else in the family will all of a sudden be a BitKey user because they've been nominating each other. And then maybe the children will nominate their friends, and then they will nominate their parents to be the people who can recover their money. And all of a sudden, everybody's going to be using BitKey. Everybody. And then we're going to have many, many people. I don't want to put a number on it, but a very big number of people using BitKey. And that is an extremely interesting proposition, because BitKey is super simple. Anybody can use it. It has absolutely minimum instructions to read about how to use it, because when you turn it on, it just works. In the same way that Macintosh, when you open it up, guides you into using the Macintosh, and then everything just makes sense. That's the standard to which Bitcoin services need to aspire. And BitKey is one of the first to do that. It's very, very good. It's a very, very good tool. And because this BitKey exists, I think the future for Bitcoin is very bright. And I have no doubt that they're going to influence the other people who offer their very excellent services to improve them in whatever ways they can improve them. And this is a very, very good thing. So I think it's logical to be optimistic about Bitcoin. I think that Bitcoin is going to do what we've predicted it's going to do, and even more. And I've spent a lot of years thinking about it and made many prescient predictions about what's going to happen in Bitcoin. And I think the next part, which is the consumer Bitcoin part, is going to come to pass, where the vast majority of people using Bitcoin, and of course, the vast majority of people are not rich. They're not going to buy ETFs or get $100,000 in Bitcoin and put it under their pillow. They're using small amounts of Bitcoin for everyday sending, saving, and spending. And that's going to be the biggest user base of Bitcoin. The smaller people, sub $500 people, and it's going to replace fiat money entirely. And also remember, because Bitcoin can be spent at a distance, with the elimination of payer fraud, that means that many people, billions of people who have no means to buy stuff on Amazon or whatever kind of e-commerce site you want to mention, once it's understood that there are a huge number of people on Bitcoin, e-commerce sites will integrate Bitcoin as a payment method. And because it's payer fraud free, for example, the whole of India will be allowed to buy on websites outside of India with the elimination of payer fraud. And apparently, when you use credit cards that are issued to people living in India, when an attempt is made to use those cards, because of the address, the anti-fraud systems kick in and immediately assume that it must be some kind of fraudulent transaction when it might not be. Apparently 60% of all attempts to use credit cards from India are declined simply because of the address. And of course with Bitcoin, because it's a push system where the payments are guaranteed, that goes away. And so all the chargeback problems and everything else associated with using credit cards are eliminated with Bitcoin, including the minimum charge that's possible. So this is a very exciting tool that we're talking about. It's a sea change in how people account for money, use money, and it's a long time coming, but it's going to be worth the wait.
Yes, I 100% agree. And I think that this episode is going to really open up people's eyes to realizing the power of Bitcoin, the solution-based innovation of Bitcoin, advice for inspiring Bitcoin entrepreneurs. So what advice would you give to an aspiring entrepreneur who wants to enter the Bitcoin space based on your own experiences and lessons that you've learned?
Well, I would say solve the problems that are particular to you. If you have a problem in Bitcoin that you would like to see a service that somebody would offer to you, you need to offer that service if it doesn't exist. In my case, it was how to get Bitcoin in a trivially easy manner if you don't have a bank account. And so I set out to solve that problem, and I solved that problem. And so anybody else who has a problem, whatever it is, you need to do that. And also don't take advice from people who don't know anything about Bitcoin. And that's there's a couple people who you should avoid for this kind of advice. First of all, Bitcoiners. Bitcoiners are very good at Bitcoin, but they don't know anything about, more or less, about the laws that they should be following, because a lot of them misconstrue Bitcoin as money. And so if you make that wrong step, immediately your idea is going to be destroyed, because you're going to be fall under the so-called fintech regulation. So you don't want to listen to them. You don't want to listen to lawyers who lawyers who don't understand Bitcoin. Even the ones that do are quite dangerous, because they don't understand what a database is. They don't understand that Bitcoin is a database. And so those are two people who you don't want to listen to if you want to start your own business. Don't listen to people who have never used Bitcoin, because they don't know what it is either. They don't see any problem with the fiat system. They all have bank accounts. They all have those applications from their banks. They can zap money to anywhere, whether it's Zelle or whatever it is. They don't see a need for Bitcoin at all. If you're in the United States, get a passport. Get a passport and go and visit other countries. And I don't mean go down to the Bahamas. I mean, go to the other countries, go to countries, all the different sovereign nations on the continent of Africa. Do a tour in some of them and try and find out how people are using money in these places, how people are using mobile phones and that sort of thing. So you can get an idea, if your idea is to serve people all over the world. Most of the people in the world don't live in the West. So you need to go to those places to find out how people actually live, and don't read it out of National Geographic or some other thing like that, because they're not going to tell you the truth. And so that's what you need to do. And you need to try as hard as possible to solve a problem that other people are not solving. Something that people haven't picked up yet about what Bitcoin is. And also, do not try and understand how Bitcoin works under the hood, because how Bitcoin works under the hood is essentially inaccessible, except for the highest level of software engineer. And you don't have access to those rails. All you have access to is Bitcoin at the highest level, the outside level, as an outsider. So that means either helping people accept Bitcoin or using the tools that exist to help businesses accept Bitcoin or to offer Bitcoin to people, that kind of thing. And there are tools that are built around WhatsApp, and I think this is a good analogy once again. You can build tools on WhatsApp without having to understand anything about how WhatsApp works, and even another better one, building websites. There are companies that build websites for other people. Some of them are quite large now, and abstracting away the complexity of Bitcoin for people is super powerful. There are many stores that don't accept Bitcoin yet. That's because they don't have a very easy solution with which to do so. And so there's a lot of room for growth in that area. And I'll tell you something else. There's a service called Ringo, like the drummer from the Beatles. And you can pay for parking with this Ringo service by sending a text to the Ringo company, wherever you are, and you just send a text with your license plate and the Ringo number of the parking lot you're in, and you can buy an hour, 2 hours, and it goes through like that. You don't have to go to a booth and put coins in or anything like that. This is a counterintuitive, groundbreaking service. It's that kind of thinking that has to be introduced in Bitcoin services. And that Ringo company, by the way, does not accept Bitcoin. And so if you want to make a change by helping companies like that accept Bitcoin, that's also a way that you can build a Bitcoin company. Bitcoin services, to condense it all down into one, Bitcoin services are what is inevitable to come next. People will want to be paid in Bitcoin. And so building modules that fit into salary programs and stuff like that are the payroll services are going to be in demand. And if it's a plugin that can be added to existing payroll packages, that's going to be a place where you can make money. And of course, none of these people want to go into an exchange and buy Bitcoin so they can pay their staffers. You're going to do that, and you're going to provide to them access to Bitcoin in their payroll services. You take care of all the Bitcoin complexity, and all they have to do is just press boop, and then their people can be paid in Bitcoin. You just tell them to get a Samurai wallet or Satoshi as their wallet, and then all of a sudden, every week they get paid automatically. And so that's a business. That's a free business idea. I'm sure somebody's already done it. I think pretty much they have. Somebody has. But that's the kind of thinking. Once you stop thinking about Bitcoin as money, that you will start to come up with yourself. And of course, I'm talking about payroll services where Bitcoin is used as money. But what I mean is you shouldn't have to get a license to be able to offer this software to somebody. That's the key. The key that we're talking about is Bitcoin is a database. It's not money. So you don't need a financial license in order to offer payroll services, because you're not actually paying anybody at all. All you're doing is offering them the service of access to the Bitcoin database, which is not money. And so if you think of Bitcoin in the wrong way, these ideas are hampered, and you also waste your time going to lawyers trying to get legal opinions from people who know nothing about Bitcoin or anything about it. And inevitably they'll be wrong, or they'll be overcautious, overzealous, and that will hamper the features that you're allowed to offer. And I know of companies who cannot add new features to their tools unless they have approval from their law firm. And that's just suicidal. So that's what I would advise people to do. Think about where Bitcoin would be useful and would introduce efficiencies to a business. Build a service that provides Bitcoin to those people without them having to touch Bitcoin. And then you have a business.
Thank you, Akin, for sharing your experiences with us today. I learned so much during this episode. It's ridiculous. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Every time we have a conversation, I feel like I learn a bit more about Bitcoin that I didn't know before. And I hope that my audience finds extreme value out of this conversation. People, please go and check out Azteco. To our audience, if you found this conversation as fascinating as I did, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Bitcoin Source, a Bitcoin Conversation. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to have Akin back at some point. Until then, keep exploring the vast potential of Bitcoin and stay informed with the Bitcoin source. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.